can, just join me in prayer as we see God today. Father God, we just thank you again for another chance, just to be reminded of how good of a Father you are. Truly your heart, truly your love, and just being reminded of your goodness and how much you really just want to be in our lives all the time. And so we just pray that we can continue to see how open we can be with you, how we can truly walk in the light and just really pursue you like we've never pursued you before. We just pray that you continue to open our hearts, but really just be with us through all our memories, through all the things that have made it difficult to walk in the light. And we just pray that we can really walk more because of Jesus, because the strength he gives us, the fact that he walks alongside with us, and really just how much it pleases you to just be honest and continue just to live in your goodness and trust you, and trust your righteousness, and just continue to trust who you are, God. And so we just pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Everybody said on that feedback I look good on the stool, so I'm keeping the stool. All right. So we're going to be looking at Ephesians chapter 5, verses 7 through 14. So it's there on the handout. You guys can read with me, and it'll be on the screen. It says, "Therefore, do not become partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, 'Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.'" And so there's a couple things that we'll look at. The first thing, really what Paul is trying to tell us, right, what walking in the light looks like, he gives you the example. There's going to be a fruit if you actually walk in the light. And so that first point is the fruit of the light is found in all that is good, right, and true. This is how you know you're walking in the light. If you have goodness, if you're righteousness, and you're walking in with truth. And so for us, right, it should be very easy. This is what Christianity is supposed to be about. This is what the church is supposed to be doing, modeling. We're supposed to just be so full of goodness, so full of righteousness, so full of truth that everybody can see the light that's coming from Jesus, from us. And so that second point that Paul makes is like your light should make others want to leave the darkness, right? It should look so good to have all that light in your life that other people in darkness will want it as well. But let's be honest, is that really what happens? Are we walking so strong in light that everybody wants to follow what we do, right? We talk about this, like, even in this church. Do you feel like you can share everything? Can you live in truth with everybody 100%? Will you share everything that you're going through? Will you share all your struggles, your doubts, your fears, right? Will you share that? Can anybody say they shared 100% of themselves? No. So then you're not walking in truth. You're not walking in light if you have things that you're holding inside. This is what Paul says, right? This is what he's basically saying. Like, if you can't share everything, then that's not light. And so this is where, if we can't walk in truth among our church people, among our family, what chance do we have to show people that are in darkness that they should walk in light? We can't, right? Because if we can't share with our Christian brothers and sisters, why would a stranger come in and say, "I want to share with you and share you my struggles"? How can I get help the way you got help? You're like, "I haven't got help yet." Right? So this is where it's important to understand, like, we need to really have the stronghold, this foothold of, like, we need to walk in light. We need to have all three of these things, goodness, righteousness, and truth, in order for us to actually be able to even witness to our other people. Because for the most part, I feel like Christians lie all the time. We lie about how we're doing, right? We're not actually sharing stuff. We're not honest. The question I say that Christians lie to the most is, "How are you doing?" "I'm good, I'm good, I'm good." Right? How many of us have said that? "I'm good." When you had struggles, you had things going on in your life that is going wrong, right? You've been fired. You've had all these struggles. You might have sinned that morning. You show up to church like, "How you doing?" "I'm good." Right? You won't admit that you're struggling. So it's a lie. It's ugly to say it, but that's the truth. If you're lying that you're good, that's not what we're supposed to do, right? And so part of what Paul is really trying to remind them of is who God is, first of all. Right? God is light. He is these things. If you remember in the very beginning when we hit chapter 5, it said, "Therefore be imitators of God." This whole chapter, this whole section, he continues to say, be like God because he's like this. This is what he is. This is what he does. Christ is the same because he's in God. Christ does this because he's under God, right? And so it's just this big old thing of like, it's all pointing towards God. This is who he is. Goodness, righteousness, truth. And so if we can't share truth, it reveals that we don't have enough goodness to handle anything that's shared with us. Is that fair to say? Right? We don't have the goodness yet that we can withstand anybody sharing anything. And so it's okay, right? This is why it takes practice. This is why he's encouraging them, right? Remember that this is who God is. He doesn't care if you've messed up. He wants you to bring it to the light. He wants to work with you and then grow from it, right? That's why the third point, at the very end, he says, when things are exposed by light, they become visible, and then light itself. So even if you made the mistake, even if you struggled, once you confess it, once you take it to God, it's visible. Everybody can see it. You have to offer your sacrifices. And then God uses it to then strengthen your faith. That's why that action becomes light. Because it's now been put under God and is now going to be used by him to help you walk stronger the next time. Does that make sense? So God is the one showing us, like, you should be able to share everything. You should be able to share anything. That's what I want. That's what I want, truth. I want a relationship where we just share everything. If you read the Old Testament, God is always constantly sharing all his struggles. He's sharing his anger. He's sharing his frustrations, right? God does not hold it back. He tells his people, this is what I'm feeling. This is my regret. This is my pain, right? He just shares it all the time. So we know God is good. He's righteous and true, right? It just sometimes when we face the difficulties of sharing truths, that's why we sometimes doubt God's goodness. Because if he's goodness and we shared the truth and we suffer for it, then why is God allowing that, right? Why is he letting this happen? Or I shared truth, nobody changed, I suffered for it. How can a good God let that happen, right? That's why that song is good. The good. It's like you have to understand, like the actions, the full picture, it will show you why God is good. So that's where that last point, like we will face difficulties walking in the light. We need others to help us stay in that light. And so Paul writes briefly on light. I don't think he does the most in-depth. If you should read 1 John, it's in the applications. 1 John probably has one of the best views of like what it means to walk in light. What are the struggles, right? There's a lot of verses where it's like, if you say you walk in the light, but you hate your brother, you're lying. You're not walking in the light, right? And so on the handout is 1 John 1, 5 through 7, right? Because it says, this is the message we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. So we kind of see this whole thing of like, it's God, he's light, he's going to bring it out of us. Jesus is going to walk with us to do it. And then the people around us is going to help us, right? Because if we're all walking in light together, then we can all support each other. So if you look at the first point under the fruit of the light, I put these 4 things that basically are the way I've seen God kind of do these steps of really trying to help us walk in the light. And so it says, God is light. He is full of goodness, righteousness, and truth. We must live with goodness, righteousness, and truth. The next point, Jesus gives us the strength to resist the darkness. And then the last one, God surrounds us with people to help us walk in the light. And so this is basically, I'm going to wrap up a testimony with those 4 points of how God wraps that up, right? It's important to understand, like when we read these books, there's a lot of practical teaching to it, but that's not how they were written. That's not why they were written. The people wrote these books for you to be able to see the heart of God, so that way you know what he wants, so whatever situation you face, you can make the right choice knowing what God would want you to do based on what his heart is, right? And so this is where these characters, like when Paul writes, they know his full life story. They know his struggles. They know all these things. So when he's writing this letter, it's in addition to all the information that they already have, right? They know when Paul's talking about, like, I lived in darkness, or you live in darkness. His darkness, they remember it. This is him persecuting Christians. This is him doing this. This is him doing that, right? So the full life story is more visible, and we don't always see it, or we don't always look for it, because that's the point. It's all about the heart of God. That's what Jesus comes down to earth to show us, right? This is the misconception of God. Let me show you what his true heart is. He desires for everybody to be saved. When you read John, he's another author that really wants to establish the heart of God. That's why the most popular verse that most people know is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he sent his only son, that none shall perish, right? His desire is that all to be saved. Right there, he's telling you the heart of God. Everything else that Jesus will do will fall under that umbrella, is under the heart of God. That's why Jesus says over and over again, I don't do anything by myself. I'm doing exactly what I saw my Father do. This is all that I've seen, right? He's trying to show you the heart of God. And so, for us, it's, when we look at the books, we want to find the heart of God. That way we can trust in the goodness, the righteousness, and truth. That's why Paul, when he writes these words, his life has shown the goodness of God. He was called as God's enemy, persecutor, and yet through the development of his life, God putting people in his life, strengthening them at the right time, all these things, he is at this point now where he's now encouraging the next group to walk in light the way God helped him walk in the light, right? And so this is where, I'm going to try to share my story a little bit to kind of help you see that, right? How did you see the heart of God when you're trying to practice walking in the light? And I was joking with Kevin where that was the verse of the song, right? Like I spilled my heart. Like I gotta give the tea. So I shared a little bit last time I was up here, and so I shared my Army stuff that I was dealing with, right? And so this one's probably the more painful side of my life. This is my ministry coming out of the Army, right? I had a lot of, like I said, my heart was very tender coming out of the military. I thought ministry was gonna be this great thing. I was like, man, I'm gonna be surrounded by all these leaders that want to follow God. It's gonna be so much easier. And that was not the case. And so, but this is where I, see God really move the most, and I'm going to show you basically those 4 steps that he had to use for me. And so, I told you guys I worked in San Francisco. I think, do you guys already know I got fired from the church in San Francisco? I know most of you know. I don't know if everybody knows. But basically, I got fired from this church because they were trying to build some stuff that was illegal, and it was unsafe. And with my engineering background, construction background, I stood up against it and said that this is not right, and then they fired me for it. Right, and that's what I told people. But there's more to that story, because really, when I came to this church, right, I didn't know what kind of ministry I was going to do. I didn't imagine working with kids or things like that. I was a teacher, leader of men, right? So I always saw like adult Bible teaching, things like that. So I ended up working with all these churches. I was volunteering at a bunch of my first year and a half in seminary, and so I ended up working with this church in San Francisco. They needed volunteers for mission trips, summer camps for kids, and things like that. And so this church, my older brother got hired as a youth pastor, so he worked with all the high school kids. And so when he was there, he was like, man, there's all these children, right? Like they're really cool, they're fun, but they don't have no program or anything like that. He's like, you should come help volunteer. So when I went to volunteer and help this church, he had kind of warned them, Joaquin's pretty crazy. He's got all these stories, right? And so he was trying to prep them. So the funniest thing is when I showed up, I met these kids, right? There was a couple of them, they're like third grade, 5th grade. And so they were like, wow, did you do that? And I was like, yeah, I did this. And they're like, tell us more, right? So they were just enjoying the stories, enjoying who I was. They liked seeing me beat up bullies, right? And so they liked the stories. And so when I was working with them, I really enjoyed it. And I could see like these kids were in a lot of pain. When I would come to church on Sundays, they would be all crying, right? Their parents would be making them do homework before service, all these other things. A lot of Chinese parents there, right? And these are all Chinese kids. And so they were crying, all these different things. One of the kids ran away. She was in 6th grade. She already ran away. And so that's where they were like, man, these kids are like in a really vulnerable spot. And they're like, Joaquin, do you think you could do something about it? So at the time, I had a house in Colorado. I had a truck. I was working with 3 churches, so I was constantly driving everywhere, doing all this other stuff. And so I realized I don't have the Army money that I was getting paid to go to school would not be enough to do all this work, right? It's like there's no way I could work for all these churches with the current budget I have. And so I was like, I probably need to start doing either at least part-time ministry or full-time ministry. So I got 2 job offers. I had a job offer from Richmond to be the senior pastor of the church there. And then there was an associate pastor position in San Jose to just do their whole teaching program. It was a very big church, right? And they needed all their Sunday school teachers developed, things like that. So those are the 2 paying job offers I had. And then the San Francisco church was like, we can't pay you nothing, but, we would really appreciate, like, if you could find, And so I prayed to God, I was like, God, you think you could create this opportunity for me to be at this church? Do something, right? Like, find a way that I can keep all my stuff, be able to work with these kids. God did not answer that prayer, and so now it was like, what do I choose? Do I take the paying jobs, keep all the stuff I need, or do I work, I knew I needed to rebuild my heart, right? And these kids, I knew I had a chance to do that. And so I talked to God. I was like, God, I have this house, right? This is supposed to be my nest egg, my safety. If once I finish school in 5 years, I could always move back to Colorado. I have my house there, right? I had a lot of connections there. Or I could rent it out, own the house in another 10 years, have a nice little nest egg, whatever I need. Or after 5 years, when I get my degree, I could sell it, and then wherever God wants to move me, plant me, I'll have the resources to just start up and do anything that God asked me to do, right? Because I knew finance is always one of the tougher parts of ministry. So I was like, if I have that house and God lets me have it, then I'll be set, right? I don't need to worry about anything. And God's like, do you need a safety net, or am I your safety net? He's like, do you need the house or not? And I was like, no. Technically, you've been my safety net my whole life. I guess I could trust. I've trusted your guidance. So he said, let it go. And so I let it go. I let go of my truck. I let go of my house. I traded in the truck, so I got the car that I have now. right? Because it was less, because I was waiting, the truck was beautiful and wasted so much gas and so fast. Because it was like a 4x4. It was meant for snow, right? It was for Colorado. Out here, you don't ever use it, and it wastes so much gas. And the way I drive, you guys probably can make other assumptions. But that's where I gave it all up, right? I wanted to work there. I wanted to work with these kids. And it was a blessing. Like, there was a couple kids, these girls. It was like a 3rd grade girl, Ashley. There was this 5th grade girl. Her name was Hannah. She ends up becoming my future niece. And there's the 6th grade girl that ran away. Her name was Sarah, who was a joy to work with. And so this for 2 years, I got to work with them the whole time, just having all kinds of fun, just continuing to be silly, just really teaching them, mentoring them. I did the same thing that I do like here, right? I cook for them. We had a Wednesday program, so I cooked for them on Wednesday, bought all the games, played with them, same way we do in our youth. So basically, I used the Army money to fund the ministry, right? The church had nothing, so I just used all the money that I was getting, and I provided everything for them, right? And so everybody appreciated it. Everybody was like, man, like, that's really cool. And so the whole time, right, I'm just enjoying it. The kids would be jumping on me, bumping into me, things like that. When we had visitors for church, they would see us playing. They're like, oh, are those your kids, right? And so I'm like, no, those aren't my kids. We went on this trip to Nicaragua, and there was this orphanage, right? All these kids. So I was the only one that spoke Spanish. We had translators for a couple hours a day, but they weren't there. So when the kids were talking to me, they're like, hey, like, are those, the girl Sarah and her 2 sisters were very close to me. And they're like, are those 3 girls your daughters? Right? And I was like, what? Like, why? I'm only like 31. The oldest girl is 8th grade. I was like, what? I don't have an 8th grade year old daughter. But so they were like, I was like, why are you saying they're my daughters? And I was like, no, those 2 that Chinese couple over there, that's their parents. And they're like, for real? No, we don't believe you. And I was like, why not? And they're like, every time they're around those people, like, they look sad and like just so heartbroken. It's like, but as soon as they come around you, like, they light up. They're having so much fun. Like, that's why we thought you're their dad. And so the kids were like, the youth, right? They're like, what'd they say? Translate for us. I was like, oh, they say we look like we have a lot of fun. I didn't want to tell them the truth. Right? I don't want to make their parents look bad or nothing. But it was just that thing. Like, that's what I said. Like, that's how close we were. And so after 2 years, that's where, it came up like, hey, the Army money I was potentially going to graduate back then. And so it was like, oh, once I graduate, the Army money will stop. And so I was like, is there potential for me to get paid, things like that? The church has kind of grown since I've been there, right? We had a lot more youth and children, things like that. And so as they were exploring that option, the 2 pastors above me, they used to be building managers, right? So in San Francisco, it's very expensive to live there. So they manage these big buildings and they get a free apartment, right? So they balance ministry with running these buildings. So their buildings were possibly going to be sold to another company, and they were like, oh, we might lose our jobs once they switch. We don't know, right? It was just all unknown. So they basically were like, we're going to use all the money that the church has saved up, and we're going to build ourselves parsonage apartments in the church itself, right? Because I was living there at the time. They gave me a free room, like a little tiny room. That was all they could give me. So they were like, oh, yeah, we're going to build all this stuff for us, build these big things like that. And so it was kind of like, well, we're not going to be able to pay you because we're going to do this, right? So I was like, okay, I guess. Like, now I got to see what God's going to do, right? I didn't make up my mind. But then when they were doing this construction, they were like so afraid of the rush, right? Like, are we going to lose our place, things like that. So they were like, we're just going to breeze through everything. We're going to approve this on our own. We're going to then just try to do it as cheap as possible, not build it to code, things like that, right? Because in this church, for budget, they have to approve it. The whole church has to approve the budget, right? Because this is going to be $80,000 to $100,000 purchase or construction. And so they're supposed to get the church vote. They didn't. They voted just on the elder board by themselves. And then so I was in those meetings, right? And they're like, we might need to get do some financing because to get all the permits, things like that, it's going to be an extra $50,000 to $100,000. And they're like, no, we're just going to build it on our own. And so when they said that, I started getting worried, right? I was like, man, God brought me out of the Army. I've seen that kind of work. I've seen people cut corners, walk that line of darkness. I was like, that's not what God called me to. He called me to walk in light, goodness, righteousness, and truth. And so as I started talking to the leadership, I was like, hey, you guys know that this is my background, right? I'm certified as a building inspector in California. I got fire marshal training. Like, I know this stuff very well. And it's like, you're kind of going to risk the health because they were trying to cut off the upstairs exits, right? So if it's a 2-story building, you can't cut off all the exits and trap people up there. And so I was like, if anything happens, those kids are going to be at risk, right? Because that's where all their children were during Sundays, Fridays, all these different nights. And so they're like, no, God will protect them. And I was like, that's not how God says that, right? Like, God says he gives us wisdom how to avoid those things. And so as I was trying to push, I was like, I can help you design stuff, special safety. There's always special ways to design certain safety features, right? It's like, there's other ways to do it. I can give you some insights. I have some experience. I know some friends from that world. I was like, whatever, we got to do it right. And so as I pushed back, then I got an answer a week later. They're like, here's your choice. You either do what we say or we're going to take you away from your ministry. So they knew how much I cared, right, about the kids, and so they knew that they thought that was his biggest pressure point. And it is for my personal self, that's the biggest pressure point. But God's pressure point is higher, right? And so that's why I said, but also like when I understood it, it's like, if I make this choice and I risk their safety, what happens if they get burned and killed? How would I really feel after that? If I was their shepherd, God gave me that job to protect them. If I failed that, then I wouldn't be nothing, right? So I pushed back. I said, I'm not giving up. I took it to the deacon board, and then I got fired. And so in this process, the deacon board obviously was very upset because they were like, wait a minute, how did you guys approve this purchase? How did you do this? There were some other people in construction. They're like, how did you guys just start doing this without telling anybody, right? And so they tried to stop these elders from this choice. They didn't have enough power, right? The elder board, they used the unilateral power that they gave themselves. And in that process, the deacons were left out. So the people that had the construction background, they basically reported them to the county, and then the county shut them down. They could ignore the votes of the church, but they can't ignore law enforcement, right? So now everything got shut down. Now they had to, live with those consequences. And so now everything got exposed, right? Everybody now knew. The whole church was like, oh, dang, like this is getting big. And so in that beginning of that process, right, they were like trying to make me the enemy. Like, he's the one that's caused this pain. He's the one that's caused this. And so they're like, Joaquin is selfish. He wanted the money for himself to be taken care of, things like that, right? He was worried about his future, his job. And so everybody would laugh at that. They're like, are you serious? This guy is selfish? Like, the stuff he just gave up to be here for all these years, you're going to try to make us believe that he's selfish? So nobody believed it. And I was like, cool, right? Like, truth won out. I was like, good. Like, the sacrifices, it was true. Like, they saw my life. They saw what I laid out there, and they didn't believe it. So since that didn't work, the next week they basically said, well, Joaquin has PTSD. He's lashing out. He's angry. He's struggling. He's self-sabotaging, right? Because I shared a little bit of vulnerability, so now they were flipping it on me. They were trying to use that against me. And so most of the people didn't believe that. Some people did. Some families were like, oh, we don't want our kids around them, right? It's too dangerous. So that's where it started hurting, right? It's like, oh, man, truth did not turn out the way I wanted it, or I didn't think it was going to happen. And so in this process, now everything got ugly, right? So I was fired. I was let go. I was gone so I ended up leaving for 2 weeks. So after these 2 weeks, I'm like, God, this is a tough season, right? I did what you asked. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm going to trust you, and I'm gonna hopefully see how you're going to use this. After those 2 weeks happened, that's when I shared it when my friend's dad got in a car accident and died, right? So this is actually at the same time. So 2 weeks after being fired, my friend's dad he got in a car accident, T-boned, and he was in the hospital. My friend called me that night and was like, he's basically, brain dead. Like, he's probably not gonna make it tonight, right? So I was like, man, I'll rush to the hospital. I'll get there, and I'll be there for you guys. And so he's like, it was like 10 o'clock at night. He's like, I don't know if you should risk it, right? Like, you're pretty tired. Like, I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to get crashed, right? Like, I can't lose another person. I was like, dude, don't worry, man. I'll be there. Like, I won't fall asleep. And so I drove there. So when I got to the hospital, my phone started blowing up. All these messages, emails, things like that. So I checked it real quick. I was like, what the heck? Nobody texts me or nothing. So it still did. And so I was like, what? This is weird, right? And so when I looked at my phone, there was like this notice, like a bunch of families had announced to the church they were leaving because of what happened, right? The leaders they made a mistake, yes, but when corrected, they just dug down deeper, ignored it, and went even harder, and then attacked the person that brought it up, right? So they were like, this is a church that's not pursuing goodness, righteousness, and truth. Like, we need to go somewhere else, right? And so as I saw that, I was like, oh man, like I see the list, the names of the families. Like, it's a lot of big, important families. And so there was that email, and then there was all the people that were upset that they left. So now they're sending all this hate emails, texts, things like that. We're like, and so I'm trying to be there for my friend. I'm like, dang, man, like it's just going off constant, right? I was like, oh man. So I was like, I just prayed to God. I was like, God, just give me the strength to silence these voices, silence these thoughts, so that I can be there for my friend and his family, right? Like, I don't want to just be down and not be able to support them the way they need. So I was like, just give me a couple hours, God, and we can look at this in a little bit, right? And so I was like, just give me the strength to not think about it for a little while. And so I silenced my phone and I went up there, right? And so it worked. Like, God answered that prayer. I was with my friend for a couple hours, with them. We were just sharing stories, right? Just telling all our good memories of them, things like that. Trying to bring the mood up a little bit, right? And so all the family would show up. All these people, they let go of their rivalries, all this history, right? Because they just lost like one of the very important person in their family. And so, we ended up having to say our goodbyes, right? They had to pull the plug, things like that. So I was with my friend the whole time. And so, it was great, right, that I could be there for him and be able to experience that. and just support them as best I could. So I ended up getting home about 4 a.m. And so I was like, all right, God, I guess it's time to look at this and see what's going on, right? And so when I read all these emails and text, it was as nasty as you can imagine, right? Like just to hate everything that they were saying. Some of them, they participated in some of the illegal acts. One of the guys was a licensed contractor. He knows if he does this work unpermitted, he can lose his license and his livelihood. I warned him of that before it started. I told him, like, don't just follow him because he's a pastor. Like, that, we know better, right? So he ignored it. He did it. And so then because it got exposed by the county, they saw the work that he did. You know, there was like gas leaks, things like that. So now he was under investigation and could possibly lose his license and the ability to provide for his family, right? So, of course, now he's mad at me, even though that was his choice, right? But that didn't stop him. He didn't see it that way in his anger. And so as all these people are just, you know, cursing me out, saying all this other evil stuff, I can't even repeat everything that they said, right? It's not even appropriate for church. But basically, the cleanest version that I can give you is they wished that I was burning in hell and that it was happening soon, right? So in this moment, I'm taking it to God. I'm like, dang, this is supposed to be church family. This is supposed to be people that we're through everything. So I got to see church family in this on my phone, and I just got to see my friend, you know, who basically my second family, who are, you know, like my real family, right? Like they've been there with me through the whole time of the Army, through all, you know, high school, all this stuff, right? They've supported me for so long, and it's like, this is what I gave up to be with them, right? Because it was even more impactful because I lost my friend's dad, right? He was like a second father to me. I had just seen him a month before, right, when everything kind of was happening with the church. And so when I went to see them, I know we're hanging out. My friend's son was 10 years old at the time. His name is Little Mikey. He was like, Joaquin, it seems like you're still in the Army because we barely get to see you, right? And I was like, oh, you know. And so this kid, I'd known him his whole life. He was born when I was in Iraq. When I came back, I got to meet him when he was 1. And I've been there the whole time, just celebrating, going to all his events, things like that. When he was 4 years old, that's when I went to Afghanistan. I had to give him, some kind of information about that, right? Like he was like, where are you going? How come you can't be here for this? You know, can you come to my birthday party in a couple months? And so I ended up telling him a story that was inappropriate, that got him in trouble at school, and then me in trouble with his mom. I'll tell that story at lunch if you guys want to know it. But it was like, what do you tell a 4-year-old kid, right, that you're going to a war zone? And so, but this kid has been there the whole time, right? And so he's been there. He was there when I got out of the Army. We got to spend a lot of time together. And so for me, it was like, man, I gave up all this time. I'm doing all the sacrifice to be at this church, right, for free. And so I remember it was like, this family has paid the price, right? And so when this kid said that, the grandpa, my friend's dad, Junior, he came in. He was like, hey, Joaquin has always sacrificed his life for others, right? He's been doing that in the Army. You've known that. You've known him the whole time doing that. He cares about people. He loves them. He's trying to do what God has asked him to do, right? So he's like, yeah, sometimes he'll be away, but that's why we just got to, celebrate when he's here and pray for him, when he's gone. And so the kid was like, okay, that's cool. And so, he went. And so, I was talking to Junior after. I was like, man, dude, I feel like I'm failing everybody, right? Like I don't have the strength like I used to. I can't be there for all the people. I was like, I just don't know what's going on. So for him, he encouraged me. He was like, man, don't worry about it, right? We love you. We support you. We know you haven't been the same since you got back, but do whatever it takes to get the joy, right? And he's like, if we have to sacrifice time with you, that's okay. But we'll be here for you whenever you need us, right? So that's why I looked. It's like, that's real family. That's how they treat you. And then this is how the church family treated me, right? So that night I just broke down to God, right? I was like, God, why did I make this choice? Or why did I give it up? What's it for? And so the whole time I was just crying. This is probably the hardest I've ever cried. And so I was like, God, what's going on? And so I remember asking God, I was like, can you believe that church people can cause this kind of pain? And so in that moment, I'm just on the ground, right, just praying and crying, and it just felt like darkness is all around. And so all of a sudden I look up, I can see Jesus on the cross, right, and he's just shining. All the light behind him. He's just sitting there standing. I'm looking at him, right, I'm like, dang, right? And Jesus kind of went like, I was like, can you believe this? He's like, can I believe that they can cause this kind of pain? And Jesus was like, well, right? And so he just made me laugh. Like, Jesus is making me laugh, right? And I was like, I don't know if you know this, Jesus has a great sense of humor. He's got great comedic timing and physical comedy. But he just made me laugh, right? Like, Jesus was like, are you really asking me? Do I know what they can do? And I was like, wow, he's right. right? He knows this more than anybody. He knows this pain. And so I was kind of like, man, like, you know, and that's what, so then Jesus kind of came off the cross and started talking to me, right? He just sitting next to me. And he was like, they rejected me. I told you they would reject you. If you do the right thing, sadly, this is what happens. This is what the call of your life comes down to. This will be part of it, right? So he's like, I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm sorry you had to feel this pain, but, this is what's needed. Because there was a lot of people that benefited from that sacrifice. A lot of people needed that, right? It's like a lot of people's faith you really impacted. Because there were some people at that church that were, they've been in church 25 years, all these different leadership, all this stuff, and they were ready to walk away from the faith because they knew that these leaders were making the wrong choices. And their mindset was that they've never seen a leader sacrifice themselves. They've always seen people just look out for themselves. They've never seen that Christ-like leadership of somebody willing to let go of their stuff, right? Let go of their dreams. And so those people like send me all those encouraging messages like, man, we appreciate what you've done, like the whole time you've been here, and really just this choice. We know what it cost you. And so, that's where Jesus, like, it mattered. It mattered a lot. And so as we're talking, right, he's kind of like, this is, you asked to share my life. You asked to know what it's like, right? You've asked to walk like me. Now you know. And so in this moment, I started thinking, I used to think I was the strongest man on the planet, right? I still kind of do. And I was like, as strong as I am, everything that I do to strengthen myself, to build myself up, to handle anything. I took the pain of one church, and it's obliterated my heart. Just one church. For all the sides of the people, right? Those that thought I was right, those that thought I was wrong, everybody still was in pain. Didn't matter. It was just a painful experience. So feeling that all, hearing every single person's heart in that moment for that event, it broke my heart to pieces. And so I was like, but Jesus took it for us all. He took the pain of everybody in the world, throughout history, through every church, all these different stuff. I got a taste of one church and could not take it, as strong as I am. And that's where I was like, Jesus took it all. And so when I look back up at him, now the whole room was as bright as can be, right? Like he was shining like never before. And so I was like, dang, I was like, this is amazing, right? In some ways, it's like, now I truly see what he's done. I was like, I didn't think I could underestimate Jesus, but I did. So, as amazing I thought he was, like this is now even more impressive of what he's done. The fact that he was able to go to the cross, take all the pain, have that heart, but more importantly, still keep that heart after it, right? He still wanted to love people, still would love the people that persecuted him, killed them, all this other stuff. He did not withdraw any love. And so I was like, man, Jesus, you're amazing, right? Like, I cannot believe this. And so in that moment, right, now it was kind of like, Jesus was like, don't you realize that we put you there because we knew you would do this? We knew we could count on you. And so I was like, what? I was like, you trusted me, right? And so you guys have heard my stories, my past. I've shared a lot of times where even, in the Army, I wish I made the right choice. I feel like I didn't lead the way I should have for God, right? And so I always had that doubt, like, will God trust me? Will God believe in me like he used to after I've had those leadership failures? So in this moment for him to say that, right, for him to be like, man, we trusted you. We put you in this position. We made you for this the whole time, right? Yes, it's tough, but you did exactly what we needed you to do. And so, it just made me now cry tears of joy, right? And so I was just like, man, I can't believe, Jesus believes in me, right? Jesus continues to use me. And so I was like, okay, like, that helps, right? Like this brings a lot of light to the situation. It gives me a lot of strength. But, and so a lot of times we feel like, oh, the story just happened quickly. Like I must have bounced back and just ready to lead. No, that's not how it worked. The truth was it was going to take me time to recover my heart. And so at the time, the next week I had to give a presentation in school. And so it was about leadership structures. And so God's plans are always funny. Somehow I was supposed to brief on the church I had just got hurt by, right? What is the strengths, positives and negatives of an elder-led church? And so when we were doing this presentations, right, it was supposed to be like 5 to 7 minutes, very quick. I had already had my presentation prepared. And so I was like, man, do I go up there and just try to go quickly and just get through it? Or do I give the truth? Right? Do I tell them? Because, most of us want to hide it. Most of us don't want to share that kind of pain, right? This was the most painful episode of my life. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to share it like 4 days later. And so, but when I got up there to present, I was always like, man, they need this, right? Most of them have only seen 1 or 2 structures. There's a reason why we're going over all these structures. We need to know what they are. And so I was like, God, give me the strength to do what you would want me to do, right? To share in goodness and righteousness and truth, share these things with them. And so instead of doing a 5 to 7 minute presentation, I ended up giving a 25-minute presentation. I was joking where like my nickname should be Mr. NSA, which is like Mr. No Short Answer, right? And so when I got up there, I was sharing everything. I was telling them like, here, this is the strengths of it, but here's the potential weaknesses, right? That they can kind of do this, this, and that. And so as I shared this, as I shared like how Jesus met me in this moment, right? Everybody's like, dang, man, like this is crazy, right? Like, you just, this connection, this bond, right? Everything that you just went through, how God, how he met you in this moment. And so after I shared my presentation, my teacher, he's been there 30 years. He's been a pastor for 30 years. He's one of my top mentors, friends. He was like, dang, Joaquin, like, I'm glad you shared that story. He's like, I'm going through something similar right now. And he was like, my church, we were trying to get a gas hood for our stove so we could cook in our church. So we raised money for a whole year, and then all of a sudden the codes changed for that city. So now they had to save an extra $5,000, right? It was going to take another 6 months. So all the church members were like, we don't need it, right? Like, it worked for a year ago, like, we should follow it, right? God, that's the city trying to stop God's construction. And so 99 of these people were like, yeah, we're going to go through. One deacon stood up and said, no. He was the deacon and a janitor at the church. He was like, if you guys do this, I'm leaving the church. If we're saying we're building for God and we ignore the laws of the land, then we're trying to do it in our power, not God's power. He's like, if you want to do that, I'm gone. Because that just shows me that you're trying to build something that's not godly. Right? So that the pastor at the time, he was like, yeah, I remember the verse, like God has the 99, but he goes after the one, right? And so he was like, I didn't feel like I should make the choice to let one guy walk away. So I said, okay, yes, we'll wait. And so this was a couple months into the process, right? He was like, I've been having doubts. Did I do the right thing? Because a lot of leaders at the church were upset, like we're withholding all this progress. We're not getting the new members like we need to, right? All this stuff. And so he started thinking like, do I go back on that decision, right? And so when he heard that message, he was like, dude, I appreciate it. Like, it's so true. Like, how can we sit there and say we are building for God if we ignore God's rules and we ignore his leading? And so he was like, my teacher was like, whether you're a pastor for 1 year, 3 years, 7 years, or even 30 years, it's a daily check. Will we follow God and do what's right and walk in the light? And so he's like, I'm glad you brought this up because, this is what we all need, right? Like, this is really what's needed. And so after he shared that, all of a sudden a bunch of classmates started sharing. Yeah, I got fired a month ago. I got fired 2 months, right? Everyone's like, yeah, I just got fired for this. And so it was like, wait a minute, like, why did none of us know that any of us got, like, why are we sharing this? There was this one guy who was fired 2 months ago, and we're like, every time we met him, we would be like, hey, how's it going? Like, how's ministry, right? That was a common question we asked, how's ministry? He would always answer, ministry is ministry, right? And so we would assume like, oh, ministry's tough. Yep, that's true. That's a true statement. He was saying it like ministry is ministry because ministers get fired all the time. It's like, that's a true statement too, right? Like he was trying not to lie to us, but he was lying, right? Like he was lying without lying. And that's where I was like, wait a minute, like how can all these pastors not tell the truth? How is this possible? Because I can understand in your congregation there's a leadership where like, okay, sometimes you can't always share with who you lead, but we don't even work, none of us work in the same church. All of us are from different ministries. None of us have any direct correlation to our job security. Right? And we can't even share as brothers what is going on in our lives. That was a sad thing. I was like, what in the world? Like, I cannot believe it. I'm the only one that shared, right? And so this is where the teacher was like, he was shocked too. Like, what? I've been leading you guys as a teacher for 2 months. I didn't even know this stuff. And so the teacher was like, you know what? We're going to scrap the lesson plan. We're going to get in small groups. We're just going to share what's going on in our lives right now. And then we're going to pray for each other. And so in this moment, like this class period, all of us started sharing everything. It was crazy, the stories of what people had to go through in ministry and how God was trying to help them, right? Like it was like, man, like it was so great to hear the courageous stories of all my classmates. I'm like, why would you keep that inside, right? Like, yes, it's painful, but God did so many things. And so when we got to pray, like that was one of my best days in school, where it was like we actually were living in truth. We were like sharing, and we were actually brothers, right? And there was actually a girl that lost her job for a similar reason, where it's like we're brothers and sisters the way we're supposed to be. Right? So I remember in that moment, I was thinking to God, I was like, man, you made this happen in one of the most painful ways, but thank you. Right? God, I'm glad that you brought this, like you led me through this because you were the reason why I got through it. And I'm glad I could open this door open for all the rest of us. Right? It's like, so that's where I was like, I see how you bring light to painful situations, God. And so even though that was a great victory, I still was not ready to lead. So at that time, it was kind of funny. I actually got the most job offers I've ever had in my life. Because everybody that was like, dude, you should come to our church, right? We got this opening. Like, we would love to have you. Like, all the way you see God, the way he moves. Like, you should come here, right? And so even the president of my school, I shared this with him. He was like, you should share this at the chapel. We have our own church services for us because we don't get to always get a service on Sunday, right? We're working. So he's like, we always have a midweek stuff. So he's like, you should share that with the whole seminary, right? All these things. And he was like, I have a friend that he's looking for a youth pastor in Tracy with like 100 youth, all these leaders, like they need a leader like you. I can get you that job right now, right? He's like, you know. And so when he said that, I was like, I know, turned them all down. And basically I told the president, I'm done with youth ministry. Never again. Sorry, guys. It's nothing personal. It wasn't about you. It was just, I never wanted to be under the mercy of elders that could take away what I cared about most. Right? I didn't want to have that. I didn't want to be that powerless. I didn't want to feel this pain again. So I didn't take that ministry. I turned them all down, right? And so God, so I said, I knew I wasn't ready. I knew my heart wasn't there. And so God was like, what are we going to do? Right? And so at the time, I ended up having a class. I met this person that wanted to do a church plant for armed military veterans. There's a base in Monterey where they have all the languages. They teach all the federal and every soldier. And so the lady was like, I've been dreaming of going to that place because if you evangelize them, they can go through the whole world with every language. But I can't get into that base. I was like, oh, really? I've been there all the time. Like, I could go anytime I want. And she's like, what? Right? And so we had this connection. She's like, well, we could get together. You could lead a church plant and start one down there. In that moment when I was like, I think this is what God's leading. I was like, I'm going to go back to my real family and take care of them. Because I know what they've gone through. I thought the church family would be better, but maybe it's time to go back to them. They have their issues, but at least they would never do this. Right? And so that's where I just kind of focused in. I took an internship at a church called Echo Church in San Jose to do church planting, to then basically do 1 year and get ready to start a church in Monterey. And so while I was there, I made a lot of good friends. I basically was the church administration team. Right? So I did all the design curriculum for their new member training. I was doing all their Bible studies, stuff like that, for all the different campuses and stuff. So I was doing what I'm good at, right? Teaching, but I didn't take any leadership role or lead anybody. There was a lady that was my leader, right? I followed her and my other teammate. And so through that time, I did all the games and stuff. Everybody loved it, right? They're like, all these adults love these games with the Bible lessons and stuff like that. And so I made a good friend. His name was Joe Newton. He was the youth pastor for the Echo Church. And so he was like, dude, like, you ever think about using games for youth? I was like, yeah, I've done that. And so he used to be in South San Jose with a small church, and they merged with the Echo, a big church. And so he ended up getting moved to the main campus. The South San Jose campus didn't have a youth pastor no more, right? They couldn't afford to pay anybody, things like that. So it just kind of went away. And so this guy was like, man, my heart's always been sad about that, right? It's been almost 4 years now. They don't have a leader for every Sunday that can pour into these youth. They're great youth. He's like, I knew them from when they were elementary. Now they're like middle school, high school. I wish they could have something, right? And so he was like, he's like, I know you don't want to do youth ministry. I know you don't want to lead after everything, right? Because I shared a lot with him. And he was like, I've recruited 5 people to run a team that have hearts for youth, but they just don't have any experience, right? He's like, would you train them for like 3 months? He's like, I know you're supposed to leave in 3 months to go church plant in Monterey. He's like, but would you at least train them while you're here? Would you give them? And I was like, dude, I love your heart. I love the fact that you care about those youth, that you've been like plotting behind the scenes to make. I was like, I respect that, right? I was like, this is my kind of dude. And so I was like, all right, man, like I'll volunteer to train those guys for 3 months. I was like, no problem. So I went there. They had about 6 or 7 youth, and they had 5 leaders that wanted to help. And so I was like, all right, no problem, right? Like this will be easy. So I did the same program, right? The food, the games, small groups talking. So they started with 7 kids the first Sunday that we ran this program. Within a month, we were at 24 kids. Right? Everybody's like, Dad, this is a great program. Like, this is cool. Like, we get to do all this stuff. And so now the team was like, we're not ready to handle this many kids, right? So, and I was like, that's true. Like, you have to refocus and do a different type of training. So I was like, all right, I'll give you guys an extra 3 months, and I'll teach you guys how to lead these bigger groups. Because they were going to look at maybe getting towards 40, right? The way everything was progressing. And so I stayed for 6 months. So I stayed past when I was supposed to. And then they grew so big, now we needed their own site for their youth on the midweek. Right? Because they used to have to go to like North San Jose, like super far away, and none of the kids were involved. So I ended up finding, I'm making deals with other pastors and stuff, finding spots that they could meet. So we got this huge place for them to have every Wednesday. So now I had to train those leaders, right? How to run the program during the midweek, all that stuff. And so I ended up giving them a whole year, right? Like I was only supposed to be there for 3 months, but I did enjoy it. And so it was time for me to leave. It was time for me to pursue what God had for me. So I was like, all right, it's time to tell the youth, right, that I'm leaving. They knew from the very get-go, that's what I told them. Like, I'm here to train this team, right? Like, there wasn't supposed to be like a very strong connection. I guess that's what I thought. Because I was like, oh, he's already has the plan. He's leaving in 3 months, right? So now after this 1 year, I was like, yeah, it's time for me to leave. And a couple of them ran up like, no, they started hugging me like, Joaquin, like, we want you to be our pastor, right? Like, don't leave. And I was like, oh man, like, I was all sad. I was like, this was always what we talked about, right? Like, I thought we were ready. But that's where like, it was just moving, right? Like it was cool. Like I said, we built a lot of bonds. And that's where I realized, like, man, I'm running away from this calling because my heart was hurt. Not because I'm not called to it nor good at it. Nor does it bring me joy, right? So I was like, now the group from the past is robbing me potentially of something, of doing what God made me to do, right? So this is where I kind of said, like, I need to take a break. I need to heal my heart. I need to see God. And I really need to find out what is next. Because right now I'm making decisions based on pain, and that's not how you're supposed to do it, right? And so this was in January, basically when COVID hit. So at the time, I took 4 months off. I wasn't going to apply to any church. I took a little sabbatical. I took one class. It was a multicultural class. And it was with my favorite teacher, that guy that I shared in, where I shared and he shared, right? So he was one of my favorite guys. I was like, I need him to inspire me in this sabbatical, right? He's just all kinds of fire. And so it was a multicultural class. And it was funny because when I was there, he was like, why are you here? You've worked with so many cultures and churches. Like, you don't need, But I was like, I'm just here to enjoy them and just, hear other ideas, all right? And so he's like, okay. He's like, maybe you can share some stuff too because he knows all the stuff I've done. And so when COVID happened, there was actually a Chinese pastor and a Korean pastor in the class. There was all these different cultures in the class. It was really cool. So the Chinese pastor, he also led youth. Some of you met him at the praise night. He was here. And so he was there, and there was another Korean guy, right? So when everything was happening, everything was shutting down, we were kind of getting smaller and smaller in our classes and meeting in person. But the last session that we had, they were sharing about a lot of the Asian hate that they were getting, right? And so the Chinese pastor was talking about that, yeah, like we're getting all this hate. Like even my youth are experiencing it, right? They're seeing all these, white churches saying all this other stuff, things like that. And it's like they're kind of struggling with what does church family mean, right? And so the Korean guy was like, yeah, the same with us. Like people would think we're Chinese, and so they're saying all kinds of stuff about us, this and that, And he was like, it's unfair, So I was hearing all their pain, right? And when I was hearing the Chinese guy talk, I started thinking about it. I was like, I know the pain of what it's like to be rejected by church family. I know that all too well. And so I was like, I didn't want nobody to experience that. And so I was like, I want to work with that group. I want to work with those kind of kids that are going through that kind of struggle or potentially facing that, where the church might reject them. I was like, I don't want anybody to face that by themselves, right? And so that's where I basically told God, I think it's time, and I think this is where my heart's at. I'm gonna leave it up to you, God, where I go. I was like, there's 2 potential other areas I might try, but this is gonna be the first one I try. If you want me back in youth ministry, this is probably where it's gonna be, right? And that's where I set my application to HOC3. And so obviously you know how that turned out, right? God called me here. God led me here. And so as we're talking about this truth, that's almost like 5 years of it's been a lot of years that took for God to get me ready to be back in the ministry, right? So that's why I tell you, like, the truth is it takes a long time to see this. Sometimes it takes things to come full circle to find the goodness. And so, for me, I'm trying to share more truths. And so I've been trying to share things to the youth positive, because I'm always too scared and nervous to share my emotions. But basically, everybody has told me, like, oh, the youth are so blessed, they're lucky, Joaquin spoils them, right? That's what people tell me. And I always shake my head no. And the reason why I shake my head no is because I'm the one that's blessed by you, right? You guys don't know how on edge I was when I came here. Does that make sense? Like the edge of darkness versus light. How much I needed this place to be good. Right? After everything I went through, after all my heart's been through, it was like, God, it's got to be good. Does that make sense? So I imagine like God and Jesus were watching me before they moved me, right? And they're like, Joaquin's still laughing, he's still having fun, but it ain't the same. He can make the best out of any situation. That's who he is. But we know what it's like when he's really having fun, right? How silly he is, how dangerous things can become. Borderline dangerous, right? Like it's just a sign when he's just having fun. And we don't see that in him right now. And so we need to put him in the best place possible, right? This assignment is crucial. And so, we talked about it a lot where it's like, do you guys hear God? Do you know what he said about you? Do you know what he thinks about you, right? And so it's like, he knew one of his best leaders was on edge, that he was on, potentially never going to do ministry again. And he trusted you with me. That hopefully tells you all that he thinks about you, right? He was like, they're full of goodness, they're righteousness, the way they live in truth, the way they support each other, all these different things, this is where I need Joaquin to be. This will be the place that brings him back. This will be the place that heals his heart, right? So that's where hopefully you guys know that, even for me, right? Like, hopefully you guys know for the rest of your life, you got somebody that will always encourage you, somebody that will always share, like remind you of the goodness that God made you with. I told you guys I don't dream no more, right? So my new dream is that I want to outlive all of you. That way you always have a voice of like somebody to support you, all right? So I'm sure some of you are like, he's too old to outlive him. All right, no, possibly. I might be too old. But now I'm changing my eating habits, right? So I got my friend Kevin over here. He's helping me eat more tofu, right? He's helping me lower down my meat consumption. So you guys know how much I love meat. So if I'm willing to eat less meat so I can live longer to be there for you guys, hopefully that tells you all that you need to know about me, right? How I feel about you. So I'm going to try to outlive all of you so that way you can always have that encouragement. Somebody to encourage you no matter where you go, or if you struggle, if you stumble. And you know me, I always have backup plans, right? So even if I die before you, right, if it happens, I'm going to start saving up to get one of those big tombstones. And I'm going to put all your names on it and then a positive encouragement on each one. So if you ever have a doubt, you can go to my tomb, my wherever I'm buried, and you can always look. What did he say? Ah! Right? So I just want to make sure you guys know that, right? Like you have that truth. You can live in that, walk in that, and know that the way God sees you, the way I see you. And I just truly thank you for all that you've done over the last 3 years, right? All the groups, all the abilities just to have fun, to just continue to, help me. And that's why I said, like, not only is my heart back together, but it's even bigger now, right? And so I thank you. I hope you realize how God sees you, how much goodness he knows you have. And I really hope you can continue to pursue that, right? And continue to live in that truth. And so as I end it for everybody, right, this is hopefully, I think, for a lot of you guys, you've had that pain here. You've fought for truth. You fought for righteousness, things like that. And there was pain that came from it. But hopefully you understand that God's heart is all goodness. God's heart is all about truth. And so if you fought for it, he has not forgotten it. He is not going to let it go to waste, right? It all mattered. It might take a long time. That's what I said. It might take a long time. But that's where I said, God was like, don't you realize, Joaquin, I'm all about goodness. I would never make you go through something what didn't serve a great purpose, right? And that's why I said, like, I've been able to go to a lot of places, share this truth. All the churches I've been at, that's all the leaders that I work. Even though I wasn't a leader as far as ministry, I've been with all leaders sharing the same thing. Like, why not trust God? Why not do what he says, right? And so I use these examples, like, don't make a choice. Don't be places that you don't belong, right? Be where God says. And so, it's been really good. It's been blessing, but it was a lot of years of struggle, right? And so, through being here, that's why I said you guys have reminded me of the heart of God, the goodness of God. And so, that's where this story can finally come full circle, right? Can finally come around. And so even for a lot of you that have said, like, man, we thought about leaving, we did this. I'm so glad you stayed. I'm so glad that you kept pouring in goodness here, because this place would not have been the same without all of you, right? The place would not have had the goodness that was needed for even myself. The goodness that you guys poured on the youth, all these different groups, right? All the young adults. It would not have been what it is. And I would not have gotten what I needed here. Does that make sense? So hopefully you understand that no matter what, I can't promise you how all this stuff's going to turn out. But I can tell you that your fight was not for nothing. And it will never be for nothing. That is the beauty of God. Because that is the fight he's fighting. He's the one fighting for everybody to have goodness in their lives. He's the one fighting for everybody to have righteousness. He's the one hoping everybody lives in truth. He's the one that said, Jesus, go down there. And Jesus was the one that says, like, God, I've seen your heart for all eternity. I know what you desire, and I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to gladly go down, and I'm going to take it all, and I'm going to remind them of what goodness looks like. I'm going to remind them of what true righteousness is and what truth really looks like. And so if you felt that pain, know that you have been in the footsteps of Jesus, that you've been walking alongside him, and he's going to be there for you the whole time, and he'll still be there with you, and he will use it all to continue to just strengthen you. And I just pray that you find the goodness from all the things that you've sacrificed for sooner and sooner, right? And so hopefully this continues to build up our desire to walk in the light, knowing if we can heal here, then that's what will then allow people to want to be here, right? So hopefully you guys can start sharing more. Hopefully you can understand how wonderful it is to be honest with people, right? To actually share and them to know you and love you for you. And so if you can, I put applications there, all this stuff. One of the things I put where it's like, what to do when someone confesses to you. I was talking about this where it's like, just say, I'm sorry to hear you're struggling. What do you think is the cause of this? Can I pray for you? Is there any way I can help or find someone more equipped to work with this out with you? Can I follow up with you in the future to help walk alongside you in love and with grace and mercy? Right? If somebody's confessing, it's because they've already been convicted by sin. They've already been convicted by the Holy Spirit to make changes, right? Let's be there. Let's support them. Let's find ways to help bring that goodness to them, bring God's goodness to them. And that will create a community that we should support each other. Honestly, I don't like the word church family. And the reason why I don't like church family is because it kind of puts a precursor under it. There's family, and then there's church family, right? That's why I said there's army family, there's second families. Does that make sense? There's family-in-laws, right? All those type of things. But it's like, that's not what God ever says. He says we're family, period. So hopefully if we're pursuing that goodness that comes from being family, period. And so if you fight for that, help me. I'm going to fight for that. Hopefully you're fighting for that as well, that we're truly family. And so it's not going to be easy, but we can try to crawl in light. We can try to walk in light. And hopefully one day we can all run in the light. All right? So please join me as we close in prayer.